One of the other risks highlighted in that report from Eurasia Group is inflation. That is certainly not a new risk, but what has surprised many is the fact that it hasn't gone away as quickly as some might have expected. I asked Ian about the political implications of this for U.S. politicians in the middle of an election year. Here's more of that conversation. I want to ask about, again, the other risks as we go through them. One of them that came up, and you mentioned already, was inflation. We see the price of oil going up. And it's funny because, you seem quite prescient in your report. You talk about the fact that this inflation is not going to go away as quickly as people expect. And fast forward today, that is true. How much does that cause the friction, I'll say, to not give domestic politicians, the support they might need in a time when people are feeling those costs going up and up? Does it add to the instability?
I think it matters, but maybe only at the margins. Look, we were very surprised that the economists in the major banks all seem to be pricing in very large numbers of interest rate reductions by the Fed. Our geoeconomics team really saw inflation as much more sticky than that, in part because of challenges to globalization and geopolitical factors. That has been what we've seen so far, and the market assessments now are much more aligned with where we are 4 months into the year than they were 4 months ago. But in terms of the way that Americans are thinking about this, the best indicator of how you feel about the American economy is who you vote for. It's whether you are a supporter of the incumbent or the opposition. And those numbers flipped completely back in 2021 when Biden took over as opposed to Trump. So, maybe not the most rational perception of how you're doing economically or how the country's doing, but it does tell you that irrespective of this relatively sticky inflation, also irrespective of the fairly gaudy growth numbers that we've seen over the last year, also the reduction in unemployment that has remained quite low post-pandemic, all of those things aren't having a lot of impact in how Americans are thinking about voting. Now, it's true that for the last several decades, economic issues have had a greater impact on bringing Americans to the polls, how they're going to vote. Pre-1970s, it was more about national security ever since World War II. I think that's starting to change. I think a lot of Americans, of course, abortion's a big issue. That's a major social issue, but also a lot of issues around national security. The border is the top issue for a lot of people that are voting. Also, perceptions of democracy, a big issue for the way people are voting, and of course, the Middle East. So this is an election where, frankly, national security concerns writ large are probably at least as important in how we think about November than views of the economy.
It's fascinating to think of it that way. I have to ask you just a couple of quick ones. You talk about El Nino in the top risk reports. We're seeing fires start already. Part of the reason prices are so high in inflation, things like cocoa, agriculture does not work like it used to. Is that going to continue to put pressure on things? Or again, does this take a back seat right now to national security?
It takes a back seat, certainly in terms of the priorities of individual government leaders who are spending so much more time on national security concerns that seem front and center. But if you're in Ghana, your top concern right now is a real challenge in terms of being able to produce cocoa. There are a lot of countries around the world that are being very seriously impacted by climate change, forced migration, greater impacts on economies that are already fiscally stretched with high debt and with high interest rates. And of course, the fact that these are the lower developed countries are the ones that are most impacted by these prices. So for all of these reasons, El Nino is not a top risk for the United States or for the wealthiest countries in the world, but that all of this water rolls downhill. And of course, even if we don't put it at the top of our list, the global impact that we're seeing from structural climate change continues to grow year after year after year.
I want to finish up and going back to the question when you asked me, do you feel lucky when it comes to countries and if President Trump gets reelected? How does Canada fare in 2024, in your opinion? Or, will Canada get lucky in all this, or what do you see?
Well, the U.S.-Canada relationship continues to be incredibly integrated and stable. It's not like Canada has a choice to hedge with the Chinese the way that the Europeans, for example, or Japan and South Korea do. No matter what happens, Canada is going to be aligned with the Americans on security issues, on economic issues, on border issues, you name it. USMCA was, of course, a big win. It was hard fought. There were a lot of tensions in getting it done, but it's done. If Trump wins, it's something he's proud of. Also, let's keep in mind that a Trump administration is quite reasonably, plausibly followed by a Poilievre administration in Canada. And so, yeah, different part of the political spectrum, but those two men will be very simpatico with each other. And I think that would drive a very strong and high priority relationship between the U.S. and Canada. And okay, different states in America will be happy, different provinces in Canada will be happy, but ultimately the relationship will continue to be a very strong and stable one.
Great insight. Last question, Ian. As you look through your top 24 risks, I'm curious to hear, is there any emerging risks that you're thinking about for 25 that we need to keep our eyes on?
Oh, I mean, look, the big challenges are unfortunately really sticky. I don't see a lot of guardrails on the major wars that are being fought in the world today. I don't think they're going to go away. And I do think that concerns as Ukraine ends up getting partitioned in some way, that the Europeans are going to face a lot more national security challenges themselves. And that's a very big deal. But a very big deal with likely a Labour government coming in the UK that's much more aligned with the Europeans in rebuilding economic ties, national security ties. That's really interesting as a risk and an opportunity. I would also focus on North Korea. We haven't talked about it at all today, but they are popping off a lot more ballistic missiles now. They've been very unhappy in terms of the coordination of the U.S., South Korea, and Japan economically and militarily. And they also have a much better relationship with Russia today, acting as a protector and giving them a lot of advanced technology. I'd hate to see a surprise from North Korea going forward, but if there's going to be one, it's probably not one we're happy about.